This week, I was able to sit down with Shauna Stewart. Shauna is the owner of a local boutique called Linger Boutique, and there is availability to check out her boutique online, of course, but she offers so much more than just a lingerie experience locally. She offers classes and workshops and really loves collaborating with other women and companies to provide a whole experience for women, especially our age, to dive back into pleasure. And it's not necessarily only a sexual connection with a partner, but it's also just finding pleasure in life, that we have gotten so busy and so wrapped up in all the tasks and daily activities we have to do that we need to come back to figure out what brings us pleasure so that we're finding more moments in our mundane days that really can bring that out. So I hope you can take some fun tips and tricks away from this conversation. I hope that you enjoy listening to Shauna. She has her own podcast, and I will put her podcast link in the show notes. So be sure to check that out as well. And I hope you enjoy this listen. Welcome to Women Mastering Midlife, where we dive deep into the rich complexities of womanhood in our middle years. I'm your host, Victoria Bird, pharmacist, certified women's health coach, and your guide on this transformative journey. Whether you're navigating perimenopause, thriving in menopause, or mastering midlife's many transitions, this is your weekly dose of expert guidance, compassionate support, and a judgment-free space to explore it all. So get cozy, hit that play button, and let's rewrite the narrative around this remarkable stage from being something to dread into a beautiful transition. So I am so excited to have my guest today on the podcast. I've been fangirling over her through Instagram, and she lives local. I love her business. I love her message. And I'm really, really excited to have Shauna Stewart join me today. She is the founder of Linger Boutique and the host of Life Turned On, a podcast about sexual self-discovery in midlife. Prior to creating a career in sexuality, Shauna was a nonprofit CEO in tourism and economic development. She has a bachelor's in business administration, a master's in public administration, and is in the process of becoming a certified sex educator and coach while homeschooling her 2 kiddos. I'm so excited to have you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
Yeah, me too. So it's interesting. I've been having a lot of conversations with girlfriends and clients of mine in midlife. And a lot of them don't want to openly discuss things about sexuality. I don't know if it's just our generation or just the topic being a little taboo in general, but I feel like there are so many of us that when you get into a private conversation with a girlfriend or a confidant, you start to open up about things that you're noticing that happen with your sexuality in midlife, but you're not really ready to share it openly. And so I thought this is a great opportunity to have a conversation with somebody that we can open the dialogue and make it a little easier to continue conversations for people who are listening.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you diving into this topic because I think it's such an important one. And because of the shame, taboo, and stigma in our culture, it does get often overlooked. And it's that lack of conversation that makes it scarier. We then create so many stories in our own minds, and it can feel like something. Sex and sexuality are supposed to be so connective and intimate and bring us closer to somebody, but we can end up feeling super, super lonely in our own experiences if we don't have an outlet to talk about them. So I appreciate you bringing this message forward.
I agree. So many of my clients have said, the shifts in their body and the way the hormones are just wreaking havoc. They're mentally on a roller coaster, they're emotionally on a roller coaster, and then they become physically on a roller coaster. And it really can impact their sexual connections, their sexuality, their sense of identity as a woman. And so I'm really excited to dig into some of these topics that we can talk about today. So one of the first things, speaking of our bodies, that I wanted to talk to you about is that midlife often brings about changes in our bodies and self-image. How can individuals navigate any insecurities or self-doubt that may arise in the bedroom during this stage of life?
Oh, I love this question. It was interesting. My first season of Life Turned On, this idea of body image was probably the most popular topic. And our changing hormones, and there's so many factors. If we're not sleeping well, that's going to impact our overall libido, body images. I think you and I are about in the same age, and anyone who's in midlife right now likely grew up with the Victoria's Secret angels as our role models, Cosmo magazines, airbrushed everything with this very specific look of what it means to be sexy or sexual. And oftentimes, I think one of the things that I find is like women don't want to be associated with some of those images of what it means to be sexy or sexual. But I think sexuality is very much an internal expression. And unfortunately, in our culture, it's become this very external, like it's for others. And so this kind of reclamation in our midlife where we get to reclaim our bodies for our own, even when they feel really out of control. And I think that one of the things that has been an interesting journey for myself, which I'm still working on because I'm one of those that love to live in my head, is how do I connect my mind and body and get more connected in my body and not look at it as like a villain that I'm trying to fight or discipline or make it a certain shape or make it look a certain way, but rather how can I please it? And how can it be a vehicle of pleasure and being able to experience pleasure in our bodies and being able to kind of experience our bodies not as something that we have to wield and control and make look a certain way, but as something that we can use to give and receive all sorts of pleasure. And that can also often bring connection to our partners, but also to ourselves because it's like an invitation to know ourselves more. We have to do a lot of that internal work, shedding of old ideas, old stigmas, old messages, figuring out what serves us and what no longer serves us. And that takes a lot of work. And that can feel like a big undertaking while we're trying to manage everything else we have going on in life. But this idea of body image, one of the things that I continually hear from our guests is like once it clicks, once it changes over and we discover that our bodies are for us, it can be super liberating and allow us to really ease into a lot more pleasure without the performance aspect of it and more about the feeling good and kind of the juicy connection aspect of sex and sexuality as well.
Yeah, you talk about the Victoria's Secret model image, and I'm thinking of all the magazines I used to see and the articles that would talk about how quickly somebody's body came back after pregnancy.
Yep.
And, she had her baby 6 weeks ago and she's on the runway. And I felt just utterly gutted when I had months and months of bed rest with my children that completely left me with no muscle tone and no stamina. And then, you go into the nursing and the toddlerhood. And as you move away from that, I had my kids in my late 20s. So by the time I was into my 30s, I was still recovering my body and getting used to having someone constantly needing to touch me all the time. And so now that they're moving into, 13 and 15, they're teenagers now, the touching doesn't necessarily, we'll get a hug every now and then, and we get some acknowledgement that we breathe in the same space.
Yeah.
But that always feeling that you need to be touched is gone. So then I almost feel like there's that need to be touched, but then you look at yourself and you're like, oh, like where did this body come from? Like somewhere, I was fighting images of my body in my 20s and my 30s, and now I'm 40 thinking, gosh, could I go back to my 25-year-old body and have it back,
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think there's a couple exercises that you can do to kind of be able to move into more of a compassionate space with our bodies as well, and maybe seeing them like less again as something that's meant to perform or be visually appealing or pleasing to somebody else, and more as like a portal for pleasure. And so one of those things is like a mirror exercise. So this is very popular in the sex educator space. And honestly, it's the one I resisted the most. When I heard this one, I was like, hell to the no. I am not doing that. There was no part of me. I was willing to do a lot of things for my sex life. I was not willing to stand naked in front of a mirror or nearly naked in front of the mirror, look at myself and say nice things about it. But the idea is to strip down as much as you can. And for some people, that might be just taking off your shirt, taking off your pants. Maybe you can get fully naked. Maybe you keep your underwear on. Be gentle with yourself as you start, because I think that there's so much of our culture and modern day, like just life, that's all about this like forcing energy. And just like, we need to have a space where we can be super soft and compassionate with ourselves. So stripping down as much as you can, standing in front of the mirror, and then finding something that you like, that you really think is beautiful, or even if it's not beautiful to you yet in your mind, is like, can it be functional? Can it be lovely? Like, do you really like your shoulder or your elbow or the softness of your skin, on your collarbone or anything? And then doing that on a regular basis, and over time, what will likely happen is that list of things that you can really appreciate about your body is going to grow. So that's kind of like from a visual perspective. And then from more of a physical perspective is being able to find different ways to be able to allow your body to experience pleasure and feel what that feels like. I think one of the things is I consider myself like an overachiever or recovering overachiever. And whenever I used to relax, I would like relax really intensely. And so I'm like, I'm going to bathe and I'm going to be really relaxed when I bathe. And I would just completely miss all of the relaxing parts of like the sensation of the water lapping against your skin or the temperature. Even a shower can be remarkably pleasurable in the way we wash our hair and touch our bodies. There are sensate practices where you can just start taking your hand and stroking, maybe it's just your wrist, and just being super present on how that feels on your body and letting your body experience what it feels like to be touched by you. And you feel it both on your hands as the giver and as the receiver, where on whatever part of the body that's being touched. And those things, like those moments of pleasure and actually being able to kind of like soften and experience into those, can be really profound in being able to help rewire our brains that our bodies aren't just meant to like serve, they're meant to receive as well, and can be super liberating and helping with that body image, because we can start seeing our bodies as more than just something that's supposed to look and feel pleasing to somebody else.
One of the things I'm taking from what you're saying is oftentimes when women come to me about nutrition and health and menopause coaching, one of the biggest things that we discuss is the ability to rest, and how women are just so, their plates are stacked, their itinerary is overbooked, and they're rushing and they're, over scheduling their whole family, and they don't take that time to rest. And so when we actually focus on stepping back and taking a minute for yourself, focusing on rest, prioritizing rest, then it's amazing what other things will fall into place. And so when you're talking about these practices of, enjoying the bath and feeling the water and, the touch that you're feeling when you do the practices, it's also, it feels like it can coincide with that need to learn to rest as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think rest and pleasure go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. Our bodies can't experience pleasure unless we're in a parasympathetic state. And sex and like orgasms and pleasure can help us sleep better as well. They're inextricably linked. And it can feel really frustrating when like our hormones are keeping us up, or our husband snoring, our partner snoring, keeping us up in the middle of the night and we can't sleep. And then that just kind of has a cascading effect. But one of the things that I often go back to, Esther Perel is a therapist and really renowned relationship therapist. And one of the things she says is, if you're too busy for sex, you're too busy. And that's one of the things that has been really interesting in my own journey over the last few years, is the moment I put sex as kind of the center, sex and pleasure at the center of my life, it became very aware of what was standing in the way of a life really well lived and making me feel very alive. Because it's not actually like, it is about the sex, but it's not about the sex, it's about life and feeling really alive. And if I'm too busy, I have a very full plate in my life, and every once in a while I'm in one of those phases now where things kind of get carried away. Like, things trickle into our schedules as they do, or you have a season where you just have to rally a little bit harder. And then you get to a point where you just really have to pump the brakes and say, okay, what can I let go of? And that could be like a physical thing, like you're actually like removing something from your calendar. It can also be like a mental thing. Like, what am I going to just be a B at instead of an A plus? Like, where is like B work or even C work okay? So I can feel less stressed, less pressure, less intense and overwhelmed over here. So I can fully rest, relax, and enjoy this experience over here.
So when a woman takes the time to rest, focuses on self-pleasure, then she's ready to get into the connection of being with another person, being with her spouse, her significant other. Let's talk about keeping the spark alive in long-term relationships. What are some creative ways that couples can reignite passion and intimacy after many years together? Because now we are ready for pleasure. We're focusing on it. We're indulging in things that make us really feel alive. It's bringing that back. And then we have this partner that we've had for a really long time.
Yeah.
We need to figure out how to incorporate them into the conversation.
Yeah. And I love this question so much. So I have been with my partner for 13 years, which in the grand scheme of things is probably not that much time to people who, have been together for much longer. But we do all require novelty. And I think men kind of have this a reputation for wanting new things all the time, but women do too. And it is an important part of being able to keep the imagination and spark alive. So there's a few things that I like to recommend. One is just starting with having a conversation about how you want to define sex. I think often as couples in long-term relationships, it's very easy to get into routines that work or sometimes don't work, but they're serving some kind of purpose. So we just get into these cycles that we repeat over and over and over again, patterns. Oftentimes, one of the things I say a lot is like, especially for women, if you're not desiring sex, are you having sex that's worth wanting? And so there's two parts of that. One is, how are you defining what sex is? Is it all about penetration and intercourse? Is it this linear process from maybe a little bit of foreplay if you're lucky, penetration, he ejaculates, rolls over, and you're left wondering where you come into the mix? Or can it be snuggling naked? Can it be taking a bath together? Can it be just a 20-second hug and some eye gazing? Can it be a really hot makeout session? Can it be taking intercourse off the table for a whole week or a whole month and seeing what else you explore as a result of that? And understanding that sex can be so much more than what culture has scripted for us. I think our cultural scripts are very heteronormative, which is super limiting to our queer community. And then B, it's very male-centered. It's centered around this idea of erect penis. And if we don't have an erect penis, then what are we even doing, right? But just as our bodies are changing, their bodies are changing as well. And so having, erect penises all the time around, like, it's just not going to be feasible all the time. So what are some other ways that we can connect as a couple and feel really close and pleasure, like being able to pleasure each other, pleasure ourselves as well? The other thing I really like doing, because I think one of the things that we can kind of get hung up on is like, we're all told we're supposed to talk about sex, right? We're supposed to communicate, or, we're supposed to like have these conversations like, what is your fantasy? Or what do you want to try? But so many people, because we've been so conditioned into this like very narrow idea of what sex is, we're like, I don't know. I don't know what's out there. And so being able to kind of expand our menus, there's this really great tool that people can Google. It's like a yes, no, maybe list. There's a ton of them out there. Some of them are going to be spicier than others, so you can kind of pick and choose what's going to work for you. But essentially, it's a list of all these different kinds of activities. You both can take turns on your own, filling it out as like, yes, I would like to try this. No, this is a hard boundary for me. Or maybe like, I'd be open to it, but I'm going to need some either deep conversation about this or to have some very specific needs met to be able to progress on this. Then being able to share those results with each other in a really curious, open-minded perspective. I think one of my big pieces of advice around doing this kind of activity is having some agreements before diving into these conversations, like we're not going to yuck one another's yum. So if he's really into one thing and she's really into another, or she and she, whatever, we're just going to be curious without shaming, because as soon as that shame or judgment comes in, it's going to shut the conversation down. And then anything that's on that list that could have been a yes isn't even going to feel exciting because we're hurt and feeling nervous or scared. So not yucking each other's yum, seeing where those yeses align and putting those at the top of the list of things that you want to try next, and just go for those and save the maybes for later. As you build more confidence with your yeses, and have more conversations, get more experience, try new things, and build that confidence level back up, some of those maybes might turn into yeses, or maybe you're having the conversations or seeking the information on some of those maybes. The other thing about that, let's see, yes, no, maybe, is having experimentation dates. So when you have your kind of like handful of list of things that you want to try, is scheduling an experimentation day. So this is an extra amount of time. So however long you think it's going to take, double or triple it. Make sure the kids are gone, you're undistracted. Plug them into the tablets. Like whatever your comfort level is, but get a babysitter, get them out, and really slowing down and taking a lot of time to just try the new thing from a spirit of curiosity and non-judgment. The only purpose of it is not to orgasm, not to like win the activity, but to learn about each other, learn about yourself. And if those other things happen, great, but it's not the goal of the activity.
Yeah, it sounds to me, this is so refreshing, because I feel that the things that you read about relationships, or that I've read about relationships and keeping the spark, it's schedule it in, put it on your calendar as an agenda item. And then that just takes all the joy out of it. If it's just something I need to check off my to-do list, like the loads of laundry or taking the dog to the vet, now all of a sudden, sex with spouse is on the list of things to do. And that just there's no joy in that, in my opinion. And I think this is giving us an opportunity to really dig into enjoying each other's company again, versus, I've got to do this because we need to do this every other week, or we need to do it, once a week, or whatever the estimated, appropriate number of times you connect with your spouse sexually is, or your partner. It's nice to have an opportunity to say, we're going to just enjoy each other's company. We're going to have find pleasure with each other. And it's almost a way to reconnect again when you've gotten into the hustle and crazy of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to touch on that too, because I was definitely an anti-scheduling sex kind of gal, 100%. Like, I don't need one more thing to do on my to-do list. And I think that one of the things, I think our language lacks nuance. The English language just lacks nuance. So there's that. I think too, it's not what we're doing, it's how we're doing it. And so one of the shifts that has helped me, because I do know, like, studies show time and time again that the couples who are having the most thriving sex lives are the ones that are scheduling it. But I think that sometimes we get hung up on this idea of sex and scheduling sex because of a few things. One is we are limiting our idea to sex as intercourse. Two is we aren't receiving, again, going back to this idea of pleasurable sex for women, we're not getting the kind of sex that we want. It feels like another area that we have to serve. So if we're not getting sex that we like, that we need, it's going to feel like a chore, And then the third thing is, like, one of the mindset shifts that has helped for me is scheduling intimacy, or just time to connect. And so it takes that pressure of like, oh God, I'm going to have to exercise tonight, and just softens it and then we both approach it from a place of curiosity. We can talk about things ahead of time. I love this idea of, Emily Nagoski and Come As You Are talks about this idea of having an enthusiastic maybe, And so maybe we're not going to go the full mile. Maybe neither of us are going to orgasm tonight. Maybe we're not intercourse is not going to happen tonight. But maybe it is. But maybe like what happens if we just like take off some clothes and snuggle, you know? Or what happens if we take a walk together and hold hands and talk? And just getting curious about the potential of things without the pressure of it. I think that it's been really interesting just as I've gone through both my personal development journey and then the educational and professional development journey is how much of sex, like, it's not about what it is, it's about how you're doing it. And the same can be true, like we talk about, I'm not going to go into BDSM or anything like that in depth, but what a lot of people see on the outside is very different than what it's experienced on the inside. And so I think that getting in tune and getting really curious about that internal experience can be super informative and guide us a lot on our journeys.
Oh, that's great. So we've been talking about how there's the stigma and the language around sex, our English language limiting how we can describe things and pleasure and talking about relationships and connection with people. So right now, can we talk about some of the common misconceptions about sexuality in midlife and how we can address or dispel them so that we can explore more freely and openly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest myths is that we as women lose our sexuality as we age or as we reach certain milestones, such as motherhood or menopause. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting as I've had conversations with people in the boutique, on the podcast, and read a lot of research and studies, is this is a tipping point for people. Like, it's a tipping point, especially for women, when we suddenly realize that our sexuality is for us. And I think up until this point, our sexuality is for other people in our culture. When we're young, we're often over-sexualized. And going back to like the Victoria's Secret, so then we're kind of stuck in this cycle of comparison. We're told that sex is for men. It's something that we need to do for our partners. It's something that we need to do to gain something, whether that's security, safety, a lot of, reasons. And I say all of that without any judgment for anybody who is in those situations, because this is like the story of our lives. And once we get to midlife, there is this kind of phenomenon that's happening in our culture where women are simultaneously become invisible. And in that invisibility, we become free. And so then we get to start claiming what is ours and what was ours all along, but perhaps we couldn't see it. And so once we reach motherhood, society says that we can no longer be sexy. We can no longer be sexual unless in an objectified way, such as the whole MILF idea. Mm-hmm. And like I said, all of a sudden, all these kind of messages and parts of our brain and our bodies start turning on and clicking, and we start questioning a lot of what we had consumed and internalized for the first part of our lives. And it opens up so much. And it might start with our body image. And then as we kind of deconstruct some of our values and beliefs about body image, maybe that moves into our sexuality, or it could happen vice versa. But it is a remarkable time where people, women especially, get to start claiming this part of their lives for themselves. And then as a result, it becomes enjoyable because it's not a to-do list anymore. It's not on their to-do list anymore. It's for them. It's not for somebody else. It's not even for even though we love the connection and intimacy part of things, if we're feeling a sense of obligation or duty to do it to keep our partner satisfied, that's going to chip away at our own pleasure as well. And so all of a sudden in midlife, there's this shift in mentality, and all of a sudden we're like, okay, this is my life. I want to feel fully alive. I want to feel fully present. And I want to reclaim these parts of myself in this very deep way. We have this idea that sexuality is only for the young, but studies are showing that the people who are in their 60s and 70s are having the best sex of their lives, and I am here for it. And a lot of it is just because they give they care less about what other people think, and they're just more about enjoying the moment and pursuing what feels good in respectful, kind, authentic ways.
Yeah, I was actually just talking to a woman yesterday about that feeling of becoming irrelevant
Yep.
and invisible in
Yeah.
midlife. When in our 20s, we despised the cat calls and we were utterly repulsed when we'd walk down the street and we'd see the swivel of heads, but then those kind of disappear as we get into midlife. And for some, that's liberating, and for some, they have a harder time with accepting that irrelevance because they're still wrapped up in the construct, the ideals that beauty is only in youth and that sexuality is only in youth, and that once we are no longer in our reproductive years, we should stop enjoying those things or looking to connect to that part of ourselves. And I think that what you're doing is really important for women to recognize it's acceptable to want to be a sexual being. It's acceptable to want to have pleasure in life. And now is the time for us to really dig into what makes us have pleasure and find pleasure.
Absolutely. Yep. Yes to all of that.
Well, and I know locally, for those of us who live near Linger Boutique, you offer workshops and programs. Not only, it's not just a place to go in and buy lingerie or products, it's also a place where you're educating and learning. And I think that is such a benefit to women, making it, breaking down the stigma around, the taboo of talking about sex, especially for women of our age, and really wrapping our heads around the idea that it's okay to want to explore those parts of ourselves if we've never explored them, which many women have talked about never being really sexual, or tucking it away after they became mothers.
Yeah, and I think since you brought up the lingerie component, I think it's worth saying that that's one of the other really toxic and harmful messages in our culture is that lingerie is for the male gaze. And I think what's really remarkable to see in our shop is that women are choosing lingerie for themselves. Like our collection of lingerie, I really try to put the woman first and how is she going to feel in it. If it results in sex or intimacy or connection, because she's feeling confident, gorgeous from the inside out, powerful, empowered, like all these things that lingerie can feel like. I hear stories of people totally resistant to lingerie, all of a sudden getting their first set. And now she's in the military wearing that under her uniform because it makes her feel alive and feminine and powerful. Or people dressing up to negotiate major contracts with their bosses or whatever. Like it has so much to do with your own personal experience. And the benefit that if we're partnered with a male partner, they might think that what they're liking is the lingerie, but I suspect what it is they really like is the confidence and the energy that she's exuding when she feels her best self. And so finding pieces that are for you, like we were talking before we recorded, like the power of a bra. And I'd kind of see our dressing room as this little transformative portal where people walk in one way, feeling one way, and they walk out with their shoulders back, a pep in their step. Some of them don't even want to put their old bras on because they now feel the difference in their bodies and in their energy and in their joy as a result of this one little act of choosing yourself and investing in something that feels good on you and your body. And I think that, there's a lot of sex educators use this idea of selfish. And I feel like, again, our English language isn't big enough to really talk about the nuance and complexity of what this is. But there's this big push for women to be selfish in bed and to be selfish in their sexuality, because we have been so heavily taught and so heavily treated as if sexuality is for everybody else but us. It is our time to claim it for ourselves and put our pleasure first and really figure out what it is we desire, what we want, what we like. I can't tell you how many women, and myself, I was part of this for a very long time, cannot answer the question, what do you want in bed? They know what they want for their children. They know what they want for their careers. They know how many calories they're going to eat, how much water they're going to drink, and how many steps they're going to get in a day. But they do not know how to answer what feels good to them or what will please them. And so that, going back to that rest side of things, really requires slowing down and high levels of intentionality around that. And that can sound like work, or it can sound like a really fun game that you get to play if it's met with curiosity and playfulness and joy.
Going back to the conversation around a bra, we were also talking about going to the big box store and buying, the economy pack of underwear as well. And just the purpose that they have a purpose, and there is a time and a place, but there's also a time and a place to, I think of it as not necessarily selfish, but indulgent in finding fabrics that feel nice on your body or make you feel sexy. And it's, I was thinking about when you were talking about the fact that it's not even necessarily for your partner and their gaze, their eyes, but it's also just that feeling of like, I have something on underneath this that you don't know about that makes me feel really good, which I think is also having a little secret with yourself sometimes is not a bad thing.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So I think we should all run out and buy some beautifully feeling, sexy and empowering undergarments for ourselves. I think that should be everyone's homework is don't worry about a significant other or trying to catch the gaze if you don't have a partner. If you're not in a relationship with someone right now, it doesn't even matter. It's just doing it for yourself. And I think that should be a message. It should be everyone's homework.
Yes, absolutely. And you just mentioned too, like it should be for yourself and whether or not you have a partner. And that's so true. It's just like our sexuality belongs to us, and we can share that with a partner if we have a partner, but we can have a very deep and intimate connection with ourselves through a variety of different practices, and getting in touch with yourself can be super liberating and empowering, especially if we're feeling certain ways about our status as a single person, because culture has a lot of messages around that and a lot of pressure. Even though all the research shows that women who are single live longer, are healthier, have better economic health, all these things, there's still this like overwhelming pressure on single people that just is unnecessary. So being able to get in touch with your body and your intimacy and your sexuality, it is yours. It belongs to you.
Yeah. And this idea that we just grow into old hags needs to also just be, just be dispelled. If we're single, if we're matched up with someone, I feel like talking about sexuality at this stage in midlife, in our 40s and 50s, even late 30s, helps get us into our 70s and 80s where we can still enjoy pleasure.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that that's one of the beauties is just like as our bodies change and we prioritize pleasure rather than performance or perfectionism or like appearance, we can have so much fun. I recently, part of my training, I had to do what's called like a sexuality attitudes realignment, where it's essentially like watching 2 days of porn. And one of the montages that we watched was about elderly and disabled bodies or differently abled bodies. And there was this scene with like probably 70 or 80-year-old couple. She's got a neck brace on. They've got a blanket laid out in the middle of the woods, kind of near a road. And they're just like living their best lives. Like they could have easily been spotted. They were private enough, so it's not going to hopefully be non-consensual, but like a little element of danger. But she's like taking care of what her body needed. Neither of them were like the conventionally attractive, stereotypical body of what it means to be sexy or sexual. They were bodies. And they were like just relishing in how they could make each other feel and how they felt as a result. And I loved it. It was so inspiring. And I think that, if anybody needs a little inspiration, that's kind of a way to go, because it connects us to our humanities in pretty profound ways.
Yeah, I think the idea of what sexy bodies or attractive bodies are really inhibits women. And I can't speak for the opposite sex, but I know just when you're bombarded with these images and movies, television shows, any kind of media that you're consuming, there's this expectation of what an attractive body is. And, maybe we even believed we were attractive 10 years ago, but there's a mental shift of, things are sagging, you lose your collagen, you're not as plump or supple, there's wrinkles, there's, parts of gravity that have gotten a hold of you. And just thinking about sex in your 70s, the idea of the joy it can bring.
Yeah.
You don't want to lose that just because you're aging. But then the idea of the body shifting, I don't know. I'm going to have a battle with that. I think that's where we have to kind of break down those barriers now so that later we can still be okay with it.
Yeah. And I think like getting more and more embodied and more in touch with how things feel. So like, I think our culture very much values our mind and our heads. And we have this like mind over matter, even concept. And we're very like visual people. We've been sold a very specific look, like you said, of what it means. But the more and more we can get in touch with our own pleasure and just feeling good in our bodies through self-pleasure practices, through getting really creative. Like one of the things I really encourage people to do, going back to those sensation or the experimentation dates, is like do like play with sensation play. Like find anything around the house that has a different feel, texture. It could be feathers, a fuzzy blanket, warm massage candles. It could be a spatula from your kitchen. But getting in touch with like how our bodies can feel different sensations and how pleasurable that can be. And all of a sudden it starts to shift us of like, what are our bodies for and what they can experience.
Yeah.
Just being utilitarian.
And when we're talking about things that, we can use to aliven our senses, there's also the hormonal and physical side of aging for women. When there's a loss of estrogen, there's dryness, there's atrophy, there's all sorts of body things that might make it uncomfortable to have any kind of sexual encounter. So are there products that you specifically recommend in your boutique or online to women to help them with, because no matter how much we focus on pleasure, we're enjoying ourselves, then when it comes to being intimate, if it's painful or uncomfortable, that can still inhibit or put the brakes on any kind of feelings that we're having about that connection.
100%. Sex shouldn't be painful unless you want it to be. So I think if you're experiencing any kind of pain, there's a few things I could definitely recommend. And also I think talking to your physician or a pelvic floor therapist, these people, like a good physician. And if you're not getting the answers, you need to keep shopping, because it is like, unfortunately in our medical system, we do have to advocate for ourselves as women. And I understand that it can probably feel very, very deeply uncomfortable to ask for help on something that's like as quote unquote frivolous as pleasure, right? You're not dying, you're not whatever. And it is so deeply important to our overall health and well-being. So being able to feel safe with your medical provider is going to be important. Pelvic floor therapists are phenomenal. I also would say just like being able to use external vibrators are a really good place to start. Again, because we have this narrow script, everything about sex can be very like penetration focused, and maybe we don't want something in our bodies, and that's okay. And also our biggest pleasure center is on the outside of our body. And so being able to use that in regular orgasms, that contraction, constriction, it generates blood flow, helps with muscle rejuvenation. There's things like that. We also have Kegel balls that are like strength training for the vagina. And it's like, I call them like lazy girl Kegels, because you don't actually have to be actively doing Kegels with these for the first few rounds of them. But of course, Kegel balls aren't going to be for everybody, because if you're too tight, and this is something else that's really important, is like how much our mind does actually have to do with our body. So in our pursuit of embodiment, we can't ignore our brain. Our brain is our largest sexual organ. And so if we are having pain, tightness, dryness, itchiness, we want to address all the medical factors, and we want to address the mental beliefs and messages that we've internalized, because things like fear, shame, stigma, all of that can play a huge role in what's showing up in our vaginas and on our vulvas and everything. Like stress, it makes us tighten, right? Like we have to like tighten up to run away from the bear, or the lion, or whatever. And it keeps us in that stressed out state. And when we are running away from a lion, we aren't thinking about reproducing. And our bodies are really smart in that they're trying to keep us doing what we're supposed, keeping us safe. So Kegel balls, external vibrators, I think are a really good place to start. And the last one I would say is a really good quality lube. If you are buying your lube at the same place you're buying your milk and your groceries, I recommend stop doing that.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah. I did a continuing education course for nurses and nurse practitioners on perimenopause and menopause education. And when we got to the lifestyle factors, I said, each one of you should have at least one pelvic floor PT in your Rolodex. Like that's just, it's something you should have for women in your Rolodex. They should also add to their intake forms. You know, we every time we go to the doctor for our annual checkup, we get those intake forms that, you know, ask about your eating habits and your sleep and, you know, do you have any new disease states? But none of them talk about, are you having vaginal dryness, pain with intercourse? Because if you're putting that out there to the patient, then you're less likely, they're not going to ask for it most of the time. Women aren't going to come to you and say, this is uncomfortable. But if you have it as something they can check off as a topic to have as a conversation when you are having that visit, it makes a huge difference. And the third thing I did tell them was lubrication, lubrication, lubrication. And not even just with sexual encounters, but there's just a lot of benefit to it. And finding a good one, finding one that you love, not at your grocery store, can really make a huge difference for women. And I think that's even something that can be shameful for women to buy lubrication. And we need to knock those stigmas down and really be advocates for our own sexual and physical health in that aspect.
Yeah, lubrication's for everyone, whether you think you need it or not. It makes everything better. It reduces friction, increases sensation. And like we said, like the high quality lubricants are going to make a difference. One of the ones we sell actually is specifically designed for women who are perimenopausal and beyond. So if you're experiencing dryness, itchiness, any kind of discomfort, even throughout the day, like if you are uncomfortable all day long, why on earth would you want anyone to touch you or want to touch yourself if you're suffering all day? Like we don't have to suffer. So it can serve as a serum, a moisturizing serum that works with your body's natural moisture, and then can also be for playtime as well. And then we have another one that's silicone based and just lasts forever. It's just amazing. So high quality ingredients are definitely something you want to look for. And then everybody is different. So like really getting in, and it's nice to be able to, you can always shop online. It's nice to be able to try samples in person, because then everyone has a different preference.
That's true. And I think when you talk about just the discomfort during the day, a lot of women say even just going to the bathroom and using toilet paper is uncomfortable. And so that's a time when you need lubrication. You should be doing something down there throughout the day if you can't go to the restroom without being uncomfortable, because you're right. You're not going to come home and want to have any kind of contact with anything down there if you're miserable when you just go to the bathroom.
Yeah. And some other things to kind of be mindful of too during this time of life is just medications. Medications like depression medications and so forth can all have a big impact on how our bodies are responding and how we feel. So being able to have that trusted doctor or medical professional to be able to work that out with is definitely like a multifaceted approach.
Yeah. Most of the time when I have clients that are coming to me, we're discussing ways to navigate the menopause transition. Most of the time I'm teaching them how to be an advocate for themselves and find a physician or provider. And they might need to make multiple stops to different doctors. And it's okay to doctor shop. You don't have to be with the OB-GYN who delivered your baby 15 years ago if they're not providing you with the choices that you want and the options that are available. And I think that's something that's one of my passion projects for sure, is to just really dive into that with women. What are your goals for your healthcare? Do you want hormones? Do you not want hormones? And, and who can we find that can provide you with those answers? Because women's healthcare that's a whole topic for a whole nother day.
I'm so glad you're doing all of that. Such important work that we really, really need.
I think it's very much needed. And I know that having the background in pharmacy, having a physician spouse, I knew how to advocate for myself, and I still couldn't ask the right questions. So for those women out there who aren't in the medical field or have access to a medical person to help them find someone, I think it's really, it's important and it can be life-changing all the way around, health-wise, sexuality-wise. So finally, what advice would you give someone in midlife who may be feeling disconnected or discouraged about their sexual journey? And how can they embrace this stage with confidence and curiosity?
Yeah, I think starting with compassion and curiosity, like knowing that there's a lot of things that get us to a point where we feel discouraged, right? And so having a lot of compassion for ourselves and maybe even our partners at that phase of life. And then curiosity, reaching out and educating yourself, like a lot of the things that we talked about from like a health perspective. I think our sex education in our culture is essentially that boys have erections, girls have periods, and then use condoms and then run along. And then otherwise we're getting all of our information from magazines, media, and movies. And so actively reaching out to classes. Our boutique offers work classes and workshops, but there's a lot of other really great women-friendly, sex-positive boutiques that can do even digital classes, workshops, etc. Lots of great books out there to read. So starting with education, some of that can just be enormously liberating. One of the books I think that should be required reading for everyone is Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. And I have had so many women come back to the shop in tears over what that book has meant to them. And they all kind of say different things. Everyone takes something different away as like the most important or most impactful message that they needed to hear. But a lot of it is about pain, about the importance of slowing down, about stress, about our brain, how our brains are connected to our sexuality. All of that is super important. And then the other thing I would just suggest is just starting really small, right? Our nervous systems need time to adapt and adjust to new things. If this has not felt like a safe place or a fun place for you, take it one step at a time. And I usually recommend starting with yourself. It's going to be hard once you add in another person or people, everything gets more and more complicated because you have other people involved in that, which is a beautiful part of that connection and intimacy story. And also, until you really know your own body, until you know yourself, it's going to be really hard to communicate that to anybody else. So being gentle with yourself, being curious, and starting really small.
So for my podcast, I like to end with a question, the same question for everyone. So what is one thing you want women entering into midlife to know? Like, what are your words of wisdom for the next generation that'll follow?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that this is your moment. I just think that there's something really special happening. I see it time and time again with a lot of our guests and people who are coming in, that all of a sudden the blinders are coming off. And when we choose us, it has a profound and radical impact on the world as a whole. We become more alive, more vibrant, more confident, with a better ability to advocate for ourselves, not only in the bedroom, but in the boardroom or wherever we are in the world as well. But if we can figure out how to prioritize our pleasure, take back our sexuality in this moment, the rest of life is going to be so dang fun. Not without challenges, of course, but it's going to be so dang fun. And when we run into those challenges, which of course they will come along, relationships can change, and dynamics in our bodies and all of that. But what we learn about ourselves now can carry us through those next phases of life as well.
Thank you so much for talking to me today. This has been so fun. And I feel like I could probably just drag on for hours and hours and have this conversation. This has been a really eye-opening opportunity for me, myself. And, I think that there's a lot of things that women can take away from this and put into their own personal lives with their own beliefs and their own feelings around sexuality. Hopefully this kind of opens it up a little bit more for them. And maybe they had that aha moment that it's okay to kind of explore what really makes us tick as individual women. So I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation. And I'm really grateful for all the work that you're doing, because those are the stepping stones, right? And even the conversation that you were talking about with training nurses and nurse practitioners about the intake form, those little things are huge things, absolutely huge things, and really important work. So I really appreciate that. But the other thing that I know you want to sign off, but I really appreciate about this point of culture in the world of sexuality is more and more women are entering the field. And so we're able to influence and change what it all looks like, what healthcare looks like, what it means to be a mom, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a sexual being, all of that. We get to change that scripted narrative for future generations as well. So I appreciate the work you're doing.
Thank you. I'm hoping my daughters right now might cringe a little bit with some of the conversations they hear me having with other women, but hopefully in 20 years, they'll look back and say, wow, she did this. This was good work she did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll be back next week for another episode of Women Mastering Midlife. Until then, find us on Instagram at Women Mastering Midlife and join my free Facebook community, Women Mastering Midlife, to continue our discussions. If you have any questions that you'd like answered on an Ask Me Anything episode, send your emails to hello@missvictoriabird.com.